Hello and welcome back to another episode of The Spoken Word. My name is Travis. I'm your host. I know that I had promised that we were going to talk about the archaeology of ancient Egypt and how that related to the Exodus and all that stuff. And don't worry, we'll get there, but it is Christmas in my country. And I wanted to tell a little part of the Christmas story that is near and dear to my heart. And that is the story of the wise men, or the Magi, as we'll see they were actually called. So I don't know what it is about this story that really intrigues me. Maybe it's because I'm an amateur astronomer and there's a star involved. Maybe it's just because they're these kind of mysterious characters that show up in only one of the Gospels and then disappear into the story, back into the fabric, and we don't really know where they came from or who they were or really a whole lot about them. We're just left with the story of the remarkable journey of these men from the East who came all this way just to find a little child for some reason that was really convicting to them. So with that, if you'll turn with me to Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, this will be the New Testament, to the 2nd chapter. And the first part of Matthew details some of the story of Jesus's birth and all those sorts of things. You can also find a lot of that information in the early chapters of the Gospel of Luke. But here, Jesus has already been born, and Matthew opens the 2nd chapter with this, and I'll just read the story. So Matthew says that after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of King Herod, wise men, or Magi, from the east arrived in Jerusalem, right? The capital, as it were, of Israel at this time. And these wise men said, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star at its rising and have come to worship him." Now, King Herod, this is my interjection, King Herod was a really paranoid guy. He killed 3 of his sons, several of his wives, and just generally speaking, it was not good to catch the ire of King Herod at this time. So, first of all, it's kind of funny that these wise men just come bumbling into the court of King Herod and they're like, "Hey, where's the new king at?" Probably assuming that this new king of the Jews was somehow related to King Herod. And Matthew, with a little bit of wit here, catches in the 3rd verse, and it says, "When King Herod heard this, he was deeply disturbed." I'll bet he was. "And all Jerusalem with him. So he assembled all the chief priests and scribes, all the Bible nerds of the people, and asked them where the Messiah would be born." Now, that word Messiah is just an Old Testament, Old Hebrew term that means the anointed one. There was this promised deliverer that people thought would come and rally Israel and bring forth a new level of peace and righteousness and all that kind of stuff. So Herod is thinking, well, maybe this king of the Jews has been born. Maybe that's the Messiah. So he's worried about this. So he calls all the Bible nerds together. He asks them where the Messiah would be born. And they said, in Bethlehem of Judea. So Judea is the province of the Roman Empire that is basically Israel at this time. And they said that he would be born in Bethlehem, which is a city. And they said that it's because this is what has been written by the prophet. "And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, because out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people." And that specific prophet that they're quoting is the prophet Micah. And that is quoting from Micah chapter 5, verse 2 specifically, according to my cross references here. So the story goes on, and it says that then Herod secretly summoned the wise men and asked them the exact time the star appeared. Remember, they said that they saw this star representing the king and its rising. And so Herod asks them when the star appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. When you find him, report back to me so that I too can go and worship him." Fat chance, right? But he sends the wise men on ahead. Remember, this is all happening in Jerusalem and not in Bethlehem. So the wise men depart, and it says, after hearing the king, they went on their way. And there it was, the star they had seen at its rising. It led them until it came and stopped above the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overwhelmed with joy. Entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and falling to their knees, they worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their own country by another route. But the story of the wise men really doesn't end there. It says, after they had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph. So the father of Jesus, the earthly father of Jesus, as we were to call him, appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, get up, take the child and his mother, flee to Egypt, and stay there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to kill him. So he got up, took the child and his mother during the night, and escaped to Egypt. He stayed there until Herod's death, so that what was spoken by the Lord through the prophet might be fulfilled. Out of Egypt I called my son. Well, this is all important because it says that then Herod, when he realized he had been outwitted by the wise men, remember they didn't go back to Herod like he wanted them, they left by another route, he flew into a rage. He gave orders to massacre all the boys in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old and under, in keeping with the time he had learned from the wise men. Then what was spoken through Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping in a great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, as she refused to be consoled because they are no more. So that's kind of the last mention of the wise men that we have in the story of the Bible. They just show up, they ask where the kid is at, and then turns out it's not Herod's kid, and they're following the star. They find the baby, they give their gifts, and then they go on their merry way. They're never given names. So with all of that being said, let's pull a few of the most interesting things from this little passage. I love the songs of Christmas. I'm a musician. I love playing the songs whenever we come to this time of season. And some of my all-time favorites are the songs around the wise men, like We Three Kings of Orient are. So there's a lot of lore that is developed around these guys, and we see it in our music. And as much as I love them, they are really oftentimes are not entirely accurate at portraying the biblical account. Think about We Three Kings. It gets it right that, yeah, sure, they're from the Orient, from the East. But were there 3 of them? I didn't see any numbers anywhere in this passage. It's not said how many wise men there were to begin with. 2, there's no indication that any of them were kings. In fact, this word that's used for them that's translated wise men, or some translations just leave it as Magi, which is coming from the direct Greek that's underneath this, which is the word magos, M-A-G-O-S. And it refers specifically, this is coming from Bible Hub, where I have Strong's Lexicon and some other information here. It says that the term magos refers to a member of a class of wise men, astrologers, or magicians. And the New Testament, it specifically denotes the wise men from the East who visited Jesus at his birth, guided by a star. These individuals were likely scholars or priests with knowledge of astronomy and possibly astrology, who interpreted celestial events as significant. And it goes on and says that the Magi were part of a priestly caste in ancient Persia, known for their wisdom and knowledge of the stars. They were often advisors to kings and held significant influence in their society. None of this is saying that they were kings. So they were advisors to kings. They were probably Persian, and they just came maybe as an envoy or something. So what's this bit about astronomy and astrology and all that nonsense? So astronomy is what you do with a telescope. It's what all the geeks at NASA do and that kind of stuff. That is astronomy. Astrology is looking at the stars and planets and whatever else and thinking that the alignment of various heavenly bodies, if you will, has some kind of influence on what happens here on Earth. So in the ancient world, these Persians, for example, this is even during like the Persian Empire and so forth, kings would do stuff like not even go to battle before consulting with, specifically in Persia, the Magi. And they'd be like, hey, are the stars in our favor or are they not? That kind of thing. They would plan major military engagements around some of this. So that's some of the context these guys are coming from. But I want to focus in on something while we're on the topic of astronomy and astrology and all that stuff. Did you ever think about how these guys, 1, knew what the star meant, and 2, what they were really following? Let's tackle the first one. So they said in verse 2 that we saw his star, referring to this king of the Jews. We saw his star at its rising and had come to worship him. Now, if you are a Magi in Persia, circa turn of the century, first century AD, what is it that would make you go, oh, look, there's a new thing in the sky? Ergo, that must mean that there has been a king born in Jerusalem. I mean, how do you make that leap? Well, there's a number of theories. Maybe they had a vision. Maybe this was somehow God's revelation to them. I don't know. But one possible situation is just that they understood the Old Testament. Now, we haven't gotten to this part of the story in the rest of our podcast, but Israel is eventually going to be broken up and battered and bruised, and a bunch of people are going to end up over in Babylon and later in Persia. And of course, they would have taken their Old Testament with them. Now, intriguingly, in the Old Testament, this is coming from the book of Numbers, which we've been in a little bit, I believe. So in Numbers chapter 24, there is this encounter between the people of Israel as they're kind of heading in towards the promised land. And then there's this guy named Balaam, who is a prophet of some kind. He's kind of like a sorcerer, magician type dude. And he is hired by a king that's opposed to the Israelites to go and speak some curses over the Israelites and help them out. Well, he doesn't do that. God speaks through him and he gives these prophetic oracles. In Numbers chapter 24, there is a passage in verse 17 that says this: a star will come from Jacob and a scepter will arise from Israel. So we have this little passage that says a star will come from Jacob and a scepter will arise from Israel. So maybe these Magi were familiar with that passage or something similar, and they concluded, oh, hey, this is coming from the west of Persia, and maybe that was referring to this king. So that's one possible theory that's floated around out there. But truthfully, we don't actually know how these guys made that conclusion. We just see that they were under the conviction that this was the king of the Jews star, and that's why they came. Well, so that's one thing that's interesting. But secondarily, how exactly did they follow this thing? Do me a favor. And even if you're inside the city, I promise you that you can find something up in the sky, even if it's an airplane. And go find a star or a planet. Hopefully not an airplane. You should be able to find a planet, even if you're in the middle of the city. They don't blink. And try and determine what building in your city this planet is over or the star is over. And once you've decided what building it's over, now start moving around a little bit outside. Now, which building is it over? Truth is, you can move just about anywhere and decide that the star, the planet, or whatever is over a particular building. It's because of something called parallax. If you have an object that is very close to you and an object that is very, very far away from you, you can move a lot, and the object that's close to you will seem to move with relation to that object that's very, very far away. This is why if you're, driving in a car or something and you look out the window, you're going 70 miles an hour down the highway and all the trees that are right next to the highway are flashing by, but you look at them out of the mountains in the distance and it looks like they're barely moving. It's the very same thing. So this is true certainly of stars that are extremely far away, but even things that are just kind of pretty close, relatively speaking, airplanes, stuff like that in our atmosphere. Even though airplanes are moving at hundreds of miles an hour, they look like they're barely moving if they're far enough away. So that being said, it's interesting to me in this account that this star has some really bizarre behavior. So first of all, apparently Herod has no clue that this star even existed, and presumably neither does anybody else. And I find it really hard to believe that Herod did not have astrologers who were watching the stars. Like I said earlier, Herod was not a good man. I doubt that he had any kind of reservations about having some, people watching the stars for him and, participating in astrology, even though that's kind of banned by the Old Testament. So I find it really weird that Herod summons the wise men and asks them when the star appeared. So apparently he didn't know. So maybe it was only visible to them. The other weird behavior is that it says in verse 10, when they saw the star, right? So they left Herod And so there was a star that was there at its rising, and it led them until it came and stopped above the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overwhelmed with joy. So this is a star that can move, that can stop over a specific building, meaning that it's like it can like come down and be close enough to that building that you can determine, must be the house that we're supposed to go into, right? It has to be close enough for you to not get parallax, for you to be able to tell what building it's indicating, right? I mean, that's just a practical matter of physics. So the star can move. It can maybe make itself appear only to certain people. And maybe it even comes and goes. It says when they saw the star, they were overwhelmed with joy. So does that mean that maybe for a time they like disappeared? And maybe that's why they went to Jerusalem initially, because they're like, well, the star just disappeared. Guess the place we ought to go is to the palace of the current king of the Jews, King Herod. So I don't know. That's a little bit of conjecture on my part. So, but it can definitely function in a way that can indicate a very specific building. Now that is a really, really weird star, because you just can't do that navigation wise with a normal star. So all those theories that you'll read out there about this being some kind of supernova, or it was a alignment of planets or something like that, that's just, it does not fit with the way that this thing acts in the text. So I don't think that whatever this was, I don't think it was natural. I don't think it was a celestial object at all. In fact, there are references in the Old Testament where there's kind of a correlation that's made between angelic entities and stars. You see that a little bit in the book of Job, where it talks about, God laid the foundations of the earth or what have you. And it talks about the sons of God rejoicing and the morning stars singing. So maybe there's some kind of connection there linguistically between talking about stars and thinking about angelic entities or something. Either way, this is definitely not a normal celestial object. This is not something you would have been able to just park your telescope on and watch, evidently. This is a very, very strange, miraculous kind of thing. So that's about the star. It's really weird. Don't exactly know what it was. I lean towards the direction that maybe it was some kind of angelic entity that they were following. I think the most remarkable thing about this story is just that even though these guys were from a foreign culture, they had nothing particularly to gain, I can't think of, from making this journey. But they were so impressed by something here. They were so intrigued, so fascinated, that they were willing to take a by the desert journey. That was certainly, no small journey, and it was certainly perilous. All the way from Persia to this little dinky town called Bethlehem in the province of Judea. And what's interesting here as well is that, contrary to what you may see in Christmas displays and so forth, these guys weren't actually here at the birth of Jesus. There's a couple of reasons we know that. One, we can see that if we assume that the star, or whatever this thing was called, the star, because that's what the Bible calls it, if the star appeared at the time that Jesus was born, then according to the text, it says that Herod issued that decree to kill all the babies in Bethlehem who were under the age of 2. So reading into that, that means that Herod had determined from the wise men that the star had appeared about 2 years prior. So Jesus, it has a maximal age here of being about 2 years old. Could he be younger? Was it, did the star appear before Jesus was born? Again, it doesn't say, but we have a maximal age of about 2 years. The other reason that we know that this is not happening in the stable and all that kind of stuff is because the wise men don't find him in a stable. They find him in a house, not a stable, a house. So evidently some amount of time has elapsed between the time when Jesus was a newborn baby in the manger and the scene with the shepherds and all that kind of stuff. Some time has elapsed between then and the wise men actually showing up. So that's kind of a nitpicky thing, but it is kind of funny to see how, again, traditions aren't a bad thing, but over time we have kind of made a conception of the Christmas story that's a little bit out of sync with the actual text. So all that being said, this is a story that really just fascinates me. I think that for most of us that are listening to this, we're probably not of Jewish descent. And apart from Jesus, we would still be outside of the covenant community. We would still be outside the chosen people of God. But these wise men, in some ways are kind of like us. They have seen something, they have been faithful with responding with whatever it was that they were given, whatever amount of light they were given, they responded positively to. They followed that and they kept following it. And ultimately, they were brought to Jesus. And I think that really can resonate with maybe how all of us came to know Christ as well, if you know him. And if you don't, I don't think you should let this Christmas go by without taking that step. Come to him, just like the wise men. Bring yourself. Bring the things that you have and lay them at his feet. The good, the bad, the ugly. I promise you, he will do something with it. So although the wise men were not kings, Jesus Christ is king, and he is more than capable of taking you to himself and showing you love that you will never, ever be able to match. So with that, if you're listening to this close to the time that it is published, Merry Christmas, and I will see you in the next episode. Thank you so much for listening, and God bless.